You ever had a dream so simple, so harmless, so damn wholesome, that when someone tried to squash it, your first instinct was to just laugh? Not out of amusement, but that hollow, half-incredulous, half-infuriated kind of laugh that says, "Really? This is what you're going to take issue with?" That was me, exactly 3 weeks ago, standing in my garage with pepper concentrate dripping off my elbow and a clipboard-wielding menace named Brenda sniffing the air like she was auditioning for a role in a suburban remake of Jaws. My name's Mike. I'm 61, retired electrician, full-time grandpa, part-time hot sauce lunatic. I got into chili crafting after my youngest granddaughter told me my cooking had no spice. Started as a joke. Now it's my damn legacy. I don't play golf, I don't fish, but by God I can make your sinuses cry in 7 seconds flat. So when I tell you that all I wanted was to test a new pepper blend in my garage turn lab on a quiet Tuesday morning, you understand. This wasn't a reckless experiment. This was art, science, maybe even therapy. I'd hired the Dominguez brothers, S and Dom. Ex-Marines turned contractors, both built like refrigerators with facial expressions like Easter Island statues. If they said a ventilation system was good enough to suck the soul out of a ghost pepper, I believed them. That day was Extraction Day, the Holy Grail, a mix of Carolina Reapers, Scorpion hybrids, and one mysterious Crimson Devil my supplier in Arizona called Dragon's Tears. No label, just a Ziploc and a smirk. I suited up in what I called my culinary lab coat, a slightly too tight white smock I'd ordered off Etsy with the words Chief Capsaicin Alchemist embroidered over the left breast. I had a playlist queued up, classic rock only, no exceptions. My garage was humming. My life was humming. Then came the spill. You'd think something this pivotal would be dramatic, maybe cinematic. It wasn't. It was one stupid elbow nudge. One moment of inattention and suddenly a tray of volcanic pepper slurry arched gracefully through the air like a slow-motion scene from The Matrix. If The Matrix smelled like regret and acid reflux. It hit the floor like wet lava, splattering across a 3-foot radius of concrete with a sound I swear echoed judgment. The smell went from intriguing to biblical in 10 seconds. My lungs hiccuped. Dom sneezed and dropped his wrench. S muttered something that might have been a prayer or a curse. Hard to tell with him. I stood there, frozen, trying to figure out if I was more afraid of the chemical implications or her. And like a bad omen summoned by scent and suspicion, she appeared. Brenda, HOA president, self-declared guardian of Chestnut Hill's beige-toned serenity, and the woman whose primary hobby was turning minor inconveniences into federal offenses. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She just materialized on my driveway, eyes narrowed, clipboard at the ready. You ever see a goose fix its gaze before it charges? That's Brenda, but with orthopedic sandals and a sharper beak. "Michael," she said, her voice already tight with implication. "I detect an aroma most unneighborly. Now I ask you, what the hell is an unneighborly aroma? That's not a thing. That's a Brenda thing." I tried to smile. I tried to play it cool. "Just a little culinary experimentation, Brenda. The sweet smell of innovation." I winked, like a damn fool, hoping to disarm her. She wasn't disarmed. She was invigorated. Her nose twitched. Her eyes locked on something behind me, the edge of a puddle glowing faintly orange beneath the work table. She didn't scream. No, Brenda was a professional. She noted. Click, scratch, clipboard. That was her sword and shield. And if you've never been at the business end of a HOA violation note mid-drafted by a woman who alphabetizes her spice rack by Scoville units, count yourself lucky. "It smells unpermitted," she said. "Michael, you're aware of Section 7, subsection C, paragraph 2 regarding ambient household emissions, correct?" Reader, I was not. I barely remembered the trash day schedule, much less the subsection on community-appropriate odors. But Brenda, oh Brenda, she recited bylaws like a Baptist preacher quotes scripture. And this wasn't about smell. It never is. It was about control. It was about her control. And I had broken the unwritten rule of the cul-de-sac. Never outflame the queen bee. S and Dom vanished like ghosts. leaving me alone in the courtroom of public opinion with Judge Brenda presiding. She sniffed again, scribbled furiously, and promised to monitor the situation closely. Now here's where most people fold. Apologize, open some windows, maybe offer Brenda a peace lily and promise to switch to marinara. But I'm not most people. I'm a stubborn son of a gun with too much time, too many peppers, and a lifetime's worth of buried rebellion. Could have let it go, could have ignored her. But there's a point in every man's life, especially after 60, when you stop asking permission. When you realize there's more dignity in a spicy mistake than a bland obedience. So I picked up the phone and called Hazmat Heroes. Concentrated capsaicin spill? Kevin, the guy on the line, asked with a laugh. What is this? Another ghost pepper challenge gone wrong? No, sir, I replied. This is a matter of civic responsibility. They agreed to send a crew within the hour. That should have been the end of it. Clean, efficient, no drama. But remember what I said about control? Brenda sensed something was being resolved without her. That wasn't acceptable. When the white van arrived, simple, logoed, and professional, she was already standing there like a sentry in a pantsuit. You can't bring that into our neighborhood, she snapped. It's aesthetically aggressive. Dave, the crew lead, tried to reason with her. Licenses, safety sheets. But Brenda was already invoking Article 9, Section Gamma, Subsection Epsilon. Sanitation vehicles must be pastel. Pastel. I was being blocked over a color. That's when it hit me. She wanted a show? Fine. I give her one. I turned away, heart pounding, breath short with fury and anticipation. I called my old buddy Tony. You still got Bertha? I asked. You mean the six-wheeled tactical Decon truck? Tony replied, instantly giddy. Yes, I said. Bring her. Lights, horn, the whole shebang. Brenda just went nuclear over a pepper spill. He cackled. 3 minutes. I looked at Dave. Stall her, I said. Ask her about shrubbery height regulations. Anything. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Just picture it. A neighborhood frozen in bureaucratic absurdity, a white van held hostage by a clipboard, and the faintest rumble in the distance. A yellow monster awakening. Because sometimes, after 60, you don't bend to the Brendas of the world. You roll in with Bertha, and you let them hear you coming. There's a peculiar kind of power some people wield without title, training, or any actual authority. Just a clipboard and an unwavering belief that their personal discomfort is law. Brenda was exactly that kind of person. And if Chapter 1 was the moment she sniffed rebellion, Chapter 2 was where she planted her flag on the battlefield. You might think I'm exaggerating, but I swear to you, when that woman blocked a hazmat team from entering my driveway, she didn't just stand her ground. She declared war on common sense. See, the hazmat heroes weren't rookies. These guys had dealt with everything from pesticide factory mishaps to frat boys who thought making homemade chlorine bombs would go viral. A little concentrated pepper sludge was child's play for them. They rolled in with respirators, containment bins, and an odor-neutralizing spray that smelled like citrus and bleach had a baby. But none of that mattered to Brenda. The van had barely parked when she swooped in like a bat out of HOA hell, flanked by 2 members of the landscaping subcommittee, Gerald and freaking Pat. Let me tell you something about Gerald. He's the kind of guy who trims his hedges with a laser level and reports fallen pine cones as natural litter violations. Pat, meanwhile, is more or less Brenda's shadow, nodding whenever she speaks like a bobblehead wired to shame. This is a residential area, Brenda began, voice high and tight. Industrial-grade bio-cleaning equipment is not approved for public display without 14 days written notice. Dave, the hazmat lead, blinked at her through his face shield. Ma'am, we're just here to clean up a contained organic spill. Contained? She snapped. It smells like a war crime. Now I was watching this from my porch with a cup of coffee and the kind of smile you give a toddler who's just insisted they can drive the family car. Dave turned to me, his eyebrows saying, "What the hell is this?" I just sipped my coffee and nodded. This wasn't about logic. This was Chestnut Hill, where logic went to die and bylaws lived forever. But here's the kicker. Brenda wasn't trying to stop the cleanup out of fear for safety. No, sir. She was threatened. Threatened by the idea that someone could take action in this neighborhood without asking her first. If I'd sent a request to clean my garage through proper channels and begged for her blessing, she might have relished the opportunity to approve it. But this was autonomy. This was offense. I'll be documenting this, she said, pulling out her phone. Dave laughed. Great, just blur our faces. We're union. That did not go over well. Brenda took 3 steps back, called the HOA emergency hotline, which is just her own landline routed to a second cell phone, and declared the situation a community-level exposure incident. Meanwhile, my neighbor Greg, 72, who used to be a fire marshal, leaned over the fence and whispered, "You want me to get my old turnout gear? I got a backup SCBA in the attic." I swear to God. I almost said yes just to see Brenda's face. While the standoff brewed on the pavement, I disappeared inside for a moment. Not to hide, no. I had a plan. Remember Tony and the Decon truck? The legendary Bertha? Well, turns out Bertha didn't just come with flashing lights and a sense of overkill. She came with theatrics. But first, I needed something that would tip the balance in my favor. So I pulled out an old HOA newsletter from 2014, the one where Brenda had written a piece titled Chestnut Hill, a neighborhood that helps its own. In it, she raved about how the community had come together when Marvin had spilled 10 gallons of deck stain across the cul-de-sac and how a cleanup crew saved the roses. There was even a picture of the team in hazmat suits. I brought it outside like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls. "Brenda," I said, waving it gently, "you remember Marvin's deck disaster of 2014? She froze. "Seems like you had no problem with containment crews back then." "That was different," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "That was environmental. Yours is olfactory." "Olfactory?" I blinked. "Lady, my peppers didn't kill a single bee." That's when Tony arrived. Bertha rumbled down the road like a transformer with arthritis. Bright yellow, 6 wheels, a rotating emergency beacon on top, purely decorative. The side had a freshly printed banner, Community Chemical Response Unit. Chad, the 30-something 2 houses down, was already live-streaming on YouTube. Y'all, welcome back to HOA Madness. This week's episode, Brenda vs. the chilly Chernobyl. Tony stepped out in a silver suit with blue-tinted goggles. He didn't say a word, just nodded once at me, then pressed a button on his belt that triggered a compressed air hiss from Bertha's side panel. Fog. Not actual fog. Just safe, theatrical vapor. But it billowed across the driveway like a B-movie alien invasion. Brenda screamed. Not a shriek. Not a gasp. A full-body shriek that made 3 squirrels abandon a tree mid-jump. She turned on her heel and stormed back toward her house, yelling, "Violation! Violation! Emergency HOA session will be convened immediately." Gerald and Pat hesitated, unsure whether to follow her or help us. Tony turned to me. "You want level 2 Decon?" I looked at Brenda's back, then at the chilly puddle still smoldering under UV light. "Let's give M the works." For the next 45 minutes, Bertha stole the show. Neutralizing foam, scrub brushes on extending arms, a mop drone. Yes, Tony had a drone with a mop attachment. No, it wasn't necessary. Yes, we used it. By the time it was done, my garage floor looked like a clean room in a pharmaceutical plant. The air smelled like lemon zest and irony. Later that evening, I found an envelope tucked under my doormat. No name, no signature, just a note. "Your antics today were in poor taste. You embarrassed the community and undermined our code of civility. Consider this a final warning." I laughed. Civility? You can't weaponize civility and then act shocked when someone doesn't bow. I walked out to the garage and opened the fridge under my workbench. Inside were 4 vials, labeled batch A through D. I opened batch C, uncapped it, and let the aroma rise for a second. Gentle. Smoky. Just a hint of menace. Perfect. Brenda wanted control. But she forgot the one thing every man over 60 knows in his bones. You don't pick a fight with someone who's got more time, fewer filters, and absolutely nothing left to prove. Let the paperwork rain. I had foam cannons, a union-certified cleanup crew, and a six-wheeled monster with her own backup battery. And I wasn't done yet. You know, the kind of peace that follows a good win. Not the loud kind, not the trophy-hoisting, fireworks in the sky kind. I'm talking about the subtle one. The coffee tastes better, birds sing louder, your joints don't ache as much kind. That's where I was the morning after Bertha did her little pirouette of righteous foam across my driveway. The sun came up like it approved of me personally. Even my old dog Hank, who usually grumbles his way through the morning walk, trotted beside me like he knew we'd shaken the HOA cage a little too hard for it to forget. But peace in Chestnut Hill doesn't last. Not when you've just humiliated Brenda in broad daylight. Because Brenda, bless her tyrant heart, doesn't believe in defeat. She believes in retaliation. By noon, the first letter arrived. It was hand-delivered in an envelope that smelled like printer ink and passive aggression. Notice of Visual Disruption Infraction Exhibit A, Oversized Emergency Response Vehicle. Apparently, Bertha's aesthetic disharmony violated subsection 14D, something about visual congruity within common sightlines. I laughed, loud. You ever laugh so hard it hurts your ribs a little? That was me, standing in my own living room, reading a letter that basically said my truck wasn't beige enough. But then came the second envelope, and the third. Within 48 hours, I had collected 7 separate citations. One for unapproved uniformed personnel presence, another for equipment that exceeds acceptable hose diameter, and my personal favorite, ambient overenthusiasm during weekday hours. It was clear. Brenda wasn't trying to punish me. She was trying to bury me under paper. She'd gone full Cold War bureaucrat. And honestly, it almost worked. I'm a man who can stomach a lot. Back pain, bad coffee, fishing stories from guys who never learned to cast. But forms? Fine print? Pages stapled in triplicate? That's a language I never learned. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, squinting at clauses and cross-referenced articles like I was reading an ancient scroll written by petty suburban lawyers with too much free time. Then the doorbell rang. It was Agnes. Now let me tell you something about Miss Agnes. She's 83, lives 3 houses down, and walks like a woman who's done with everyone's nonsense. She's lived through war, widowhood, and HOA meetings that went past 9 p.m. The woman's a legend. She stepped inside, glanced at the stack of notices on my table and said, "Ah, Brenda's gone feral." I nodded. "She's trying to drown me in bylaws." Agnes smiled. A slow, toothy thing that suggested she'd seen this play before. "Then we drown her back, but with charm and logistics." I blinked. What does that even mean? She reached into her purse and pulled out a tattered binder labeled HOA Survivors Club. Inside, a treasure trove of every HOA regulation ever challenged, modified, or quietly buried. Annotated, color-coded, with sticky notes. I stared at it like a starving man discovering barbecue ribs. "You're not the first," she said. "Won't be the last. But you might be the loudest." So we made a plan. Not to fight fire with fire, that's Brenda's game. Ours would be fire with flowers. You see, Agnes had a theory. If they can't beat you on legality, they'll try to shame you with perception. So we shift the perception. The next morning, Operation Code Rose began. First, we accidentally power washed the front yard, removing the faint pepper stain Brenda had been pointing out to passersby like it was a crime scene. Then we brought in some planters. Big ones, bright ones, and filled them with so many roses. The place looked like a florist had exploded. Red, yellow, pink, blooms so thick you couldn't see the fence anymore. That's when Chad came over with his drone again. "People are asking," he said, grinning. "What's going on over here? You running for office or something?" "Nope," I replied. "Just beautifying in the name of compliance." Then came the bench. You see, there's a rule in the HOA about unpermitted outdoor seating structures. But there's a loophole if it's used as a community rest point. So I placed a bench out front, put up a sign that read, "For anyone tired of bureaucracy, sit here, rest your soul." The next day, An elderly man from the next cul-de-sac sat on it and read the paper for 2 straight hours. 2 women walked by and took selfies with the roses. Kids came to count the flowers. It became a thing. Brenda, meanwhile, fumed. She walked by 3 times the first afternoon, measuring things with a ruler and muttering into her phone. But she couldn't stop it. I was in complete compliance. She'd built a fortress of policy, and I danced through it like Fred Astaire in orthopedic sneakers. But Brenda wasn't done. She called an emergency HOA meeting, scheduled it for Saturday morning, prime coffee and lawn mowing hours. I went, of course, wore my cleanest flannel, brought donuts, smiled at everyone. The room was packed. Folks from every corner of Chestnut Hill were there, half curious, half hoping for drama. Brenda stood at the front like a prosecutor mid-trial. She'd even made a PowerPoint presentation titled, "The Escalation of Disruptive Enthusiasm." Slide after slide of me, Bertha, the roses, the bench. At one point she zoomed in on my garden gnome, claiming it had subversive posture. When she finally paused, the room was silent. I stood, looked around, let the quiet stretch just a second too long. Then I said, "I just wanted to clean my garage." Laughter, not just a chuckle. Real, belly-deep laughter. Agnes smirked. Greg from down the street slapped his knee. Even Pat, sweet, spineless Pat, cracked a grin. Brenda's face darkened like a storm front. I continued, and when I did, I followed every safety measure, every law, and when someone tried to stop me, I responded with dignity, foam, and roses. If that's a crime, well, I guess you'll have to cite me for reckless kindness. The vote to censure me failed. Hard. Brenda stormed out before the meeting even ended. I walked home slow, taking in the late morning breeze. At my doorstep was a new note, not from the HOA, just a folded piece of paper with a drawing of a yellow truck and a rose. Underneath, "My dad says you're like Batman, but spicy." I taped it to my fridge, because sometimes after 60 you don't need capes or campaigns, just peppers, and a bench, and the patience to outlast anyone drunk on their own authority. You ever win a battle so clean it makes you suspicious? That was me for a solid 2 days after the HOA meeting. No fresh letters, no warning tags taped to my mailbox, not even a passive-aggressive post on the neighborhood Facebook group. Brenda had vanished from public life like a wounded monarch, licking her paper-cut wounds in her cul-de-sac castle. But I've lived long enough to know when silence stops being peaceful and starts being strategic. Because with folks like Brenda, it's never over, it's just intermission. So, while the roses bloomed and neighbors kept snapping selfies on the rebellion bench, I stayed alert. Not paranoid, just seasoned. And wouldn't you know it, the next shot wasn't a letter. It was a form. Official, thick-stock paper delivered by actual mail this time. It wasn't from Brenda directly. Oh no. This one was stamped by the regional HOA council. You didn't know such a thing existed? Neither did I. Apparently, Brenda had escalated my case to what she called the compliance tribunal. I thought it sounded like a scene from Star Wars, but it was real. They were calling for a review of my pattern of behavior. A term so vague it could mean anything from planting unapproved tulips to starting a chili-based cult. The form offered me 2 choices: either attend a mediation session or agree to an informal corrective plan. That last one sounded suspiciously like surrender. So I circled the mediation box and wrote, in all caps, "I'll bring coffee. You bring logic." Now, a sane person might have started preparing statements or organizing documentation. But I knew better. You don't show up to a rigged game hoping to play fair. You show up wearing boots and carrying stories. And I wasn't coming alone. The day before the mediation, I went door to door old school. Greg the fire marshal, Agnes with her survival binder, Chad the drone guy, even old Leroy with the oxygen tank who hadn't spoken at a meeting in 5 years. I said, "Come if you want. Sit in the back. Nod when I make a point." They all said yes. Not because they feared Brenda, because they knew her. Saturday came fast. The mediation was held at the community center. Same place we usually do line dancing and potlucks. Felt weird walking in without a slow cooker. Brenda was already seated, wearing her HOA name badge like it gave her diplomatic immunity. She had a manila folder stacked with documents, tabs sticking out like teeth. Next to her sat two council representatives, real polished types. One wore a bow tie. The other had reading glasses on a chain. I could smell judgment before they even spoke. Mr. Holloway, the bow tie began. We're here today to discuss recent concerns regarding neighborhood disruption and a trend of escalating nonconformity. I raised my eyebrows. You mean the hot sauce? Brenda cut in. It's not just the hot sauce. It's the truck, the foam, the flowers, the bench. The bench. Yes, she said, pointing to her printouts. It attracts loitering. I held up my thermos. Loitering? Or sitting down without your permission? The glasses guy tried to smooth it over. Let's focus on resolution. Perhaps a compromise. Scaling back the more, theatrical elements of your residence. I looked right at Brenda. You mean the foam cannons? Glasses flinched. You have foam cannons? Just one. Technically decorative now. There was a long pause. Then, from the back, Agnes spoke. Calm, clear, like she was reading scripture. What exactly is the crime here? That the man cleaned responsibly? That he planted flowers? That people like sitting in front of his house? Greg stood up, nodding. Hell, he made this place interesting again. I didn't know half my neighbors before Mike made Brenda lose her mind. Brenda's folder slipped a little from her lap. She was losing the room and she knew it. Bowtie cleared his throat. Mr. Holloway, are you willing to remove any of the additions in question? I leaned forward. I'll make you a deal. I'll take down the foam cannon if Brenda agrees to stop inventing infractions that don't exist. And I want it in writing. Brenda gasped. That is not fair, I asked. Or familiar? In the end, they called it a mutual cooling period. No new infractions for 90 days, and I toned down any theatrical response units. Bertha stayed in the garage. The bench stayed right where it was. But Brenda, she wasn't done. Oh no. That same week, a new HOA proposal appeared. Aesthetic Consistency Initiative. It was vague. Too vague. But buried in the wording was a clause about unapproved lawn displays, which conveniently included non-regulation furniture, signage, or decorative vehicles. They were going after the bench. So I pivoted. Called my cousin Joe in Nebraska. He makes handcrafted wooden furniture. Told him I needed a bench, but not just any bench, a tribute bench. We engraved it with the names of every resident who had ever served in the military. Greg, Leroy, two folks I hadn't even met yet. We planted it right where the old one sat. Held a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Agnes read a poem. Chad flew the drone with a tiny American flag. Brenda didn't dare touch it. Even she knew the optics were radioactive. Now, the HOA might still breathe fire. They might still hold their meetings and scribble notes in the dark. But something shifted that day. Not just for me, for everyone. Because we stopped treating the HOA like it was a courtroom. We treated it like what it really was. A neighborhood. Messy, loud, full of flavor. And finally, awake. Some wars don't end with surrender, they end with ceremony. Not the marching band kind or the kind where someone signs a peace treaty and flashes a fake smile for the cameras. No, the real victories, the ones that matter to men like you and me, they end with a quiet turning of the tide. One day you're standing on your porch being treated like a criminal for planting roses, and the next you've got folks dropping off banana bread and asking what fertilizer you use. That's how it started. The shift, not with a bang, but with blooming hydrangeas and unsolicited zucchini from 3 different gardens. The neighborhood was changing. Brenda knew it. She felt it like a draft under a sealed window. She'd fought with everything she had, paperwork, policies, petty rules about paint shades. But the more she fought, the more ridiculous she looked. And when the veterans' bench showed up, engraved with names and sealed with polyurethane and respect, she didn't just lose control. She lost relevance. But Brenda didn't fade quietly. No, ma'am. Like any true bureaucratic warrior, she had one last trick in her clipboard. The audit. Now, I don't know if your HOA's ever gone full audit mode, but let me tell you, It's like being strip-searched by a librarian. Every document, every permit, every receipt going back 5 years. She even tried to track down whether my chili extractor fan had exceeded the local decibel ordinance. I didn't even know there was a decibel ordinance. Apparently, 61 decibels is the maximum acceptable threshold for culinary machinery. But here's where the universe stepped in. You remember little Billy? Lives across the street. Kids obsessed with trucks. Wears dinosaur pajamas like armor. Calls me Magma Mike. Well, turns out one of the roses I planted, one of the ones Brenda swore was part of my visual overreach, was actually planted by Billy and his dad, Mark. They'd done it one Saturday while I was inside fixing a busted water line. I didn't even know. But Brenda had included that rose in her violation portfolio, labeled Unregistered Floral Display, South Edge Lot Number 42. Mark didn't like that. Not one bit. The man's a dentist, mild as warm milk. But when Brenda implied his son's rose was illegal, something inside him snapped. Next day, Mark shows up at the HOA meeting with Billy. The kid's holding a laminated photo of himself planting the rose, smiling like he'd just saved the planet. Mark gets up, clears his throat, and says, "If this community is more upset about flowers than fostering pride in our children, then maybe we need new leadership." Room went quiet. Then Greg clapped. Agnes stood up. Chad live-streamed the whole thing. Within hours, the footage had 3,000 views and the hashtag Rosegate was trending locally. Brenda didn't step down. She evaporated. Didn't return calls. Canceled 2 HOA meetings in a row. Her clipboard disappeared from public view, replaced by a lawn gnome holding a surrender flag. Placed there, I'm told, by an anonymous neighbor with excellent comedic timing. But here's where the real ending starts. 3 weeks later, I get a knock on the door. It's Tony. He's got the Decon truck cleaned, waxed, and parked out front. He looks at me and says, "You ready?" "Ready for what?" Ask. "For the final act." Turns out Tony's been working on something, Code Rose. The return. A performance decontamination of Brenda's front yard. Not to vandalize, not to mock, but to sanitize the hostility that had poisoned the block. Now, I'll be honest. Part of me thought it was ridiculous. But then I remembered what Brenda did to the neighborhood, how she turned compliance into a weapon, fear into a routine. And suddenly, it didn't feel silly. Felt right. So we planned it down to the minute. Sunday, 10 a.m. We wore suits, real hazmat gear this time, donated by an old buddy of Tony's from his army days. Hank, my old dog, wore a vest labeled Moral Support Unit. Chad brought the drone. Agnes, bless her, brought lemonade and folding chairs. When the time came, we rolled Bertha right up to Brenda's lawn. Nobody had seen her in days. Curtains drawn, porch empty, yard still immaculate like nothing had ever happened. But it had. Tony hit the fog switch. Mist sprayed over the grass, swirling like a baptism. We moved slowly, ceremonially, no music, no shouting. Just the steady hiss of cleansing. We knelt beside her rose bushes, each of us carrying a white cloth. We wiped every leaf, every petal. We didn't speak. We honored. Then, in front of her porch, I placed a small wooden sign. Burned into it were the words, "To all the things we tried to control, and the neighbors we forgot to understand." We stepped back, stood in silence. Even Hank sat still. Then the door opened. Brenda, not in armor, not with a clipboard, just a cardigan. No makeup, hair pinned back like she used to wear it before this all began. She looked at us, looked at the sign. Her eyes glistened, just enough. And then she nodded, didn't say a word, just closed the door again. But we didn't need more than that. You see, we weren't just fighting over chili sauce or roses or foam cannons. We were fighting for the soul of a place we still believed could be worth living in. And that morning, with a truck full of fog and a sign full of truth, I think we won. I sat on the rebellion bench that night, sipping bourbon and listening to crickets. Agnes walked by and said, "Well, you did it." "Nah," I replied. "We did. Because if life has taught me anything, it's that order without kindness is just quiet tyranny. But order with neighbors who give a damn, that's community." And sometimes to protect that, you need Bertha, a drone, a rose, and a little bit of hellfire in your soul.